But first up, you can sense the frustration developing among many people, particularly millennials, as Australia closes its beaches. People can't get a feed or a drink at a pub, and cabin fever sets in as people do the right thing and stay home mostly. But let's be really clear. We need to get used to it, particularly coming up to Easter, which is a time when we all tend to flock to the beaches and tend to flock en masse to particular areas. Now, while Australia is flattening the curve, and there are significant positives coming out of the numbers compared to other countries, relaxing restrictions are still a long way off. In fact, the biggest challenge facing Scott Morrison and the National Cabinet right now is the difficult balancing act between ensuring the virus numbers don't spike dramatically, while at the same time ensuring the country doesn't go broke over the next 6 months. And that is a terrible balancing act to have to confront. Now, Australians are a pretty resilient lot, and with the exception of a few drongos, we're up for this. Most of us practising proper social distancing techniques, sanitary etiquette and quarantining at home. It's resulted in a significant decline in the infection rate, and we'll be talking to Stephen Duckett about that shortly. We're now among the best performing countries in the world when it comes to the overall rate and deaths per 1 million people. But experts such as University of Melbourne epidemiologist Professor Tony Blakely says we're now having a brutal choice going forward. He says we can either go hard and increase restrictions, which would include a complete lockdown, or stick with the status quo and flatten the curve until a vaccine is developed, which could take 18 months. Or we could even look at herd immunity, where 60% of us would get the virus, resulting in thousands of deaths. I think we can rule that one out pretty quickly. The most likely option is the status quo, a gradual recovery, but with massive social and fiscal implications. This seems the less brutal and more socially palatable of all the options. But if we're going to be subjected to this way of life for an extended period, it's important that the government not stop us from living. By that, what I mean is we need our sport. We need racing to continue. We need footy to return in some form, albeit obviously in a different format with no crowds. Otherwise, quite literally, society will go into meltdown. As I said at the start, you can sense the frustration. We can't just delete 6 months of our lives with all the economic and social costs attached to that. If we want Aussies to come out of this with our mental health intact, we get the sacrifices and we get the responsibilities thing. We get all that. We understand. We're part of Team Australia. But getting the balance right between emerging from this unscathed and deploying draconian restrictions that send the country into a mental and economic depression is the big challenge for the National Cabinet right now. Getting that balance right is so important. Now, we're all in this to win and we're all in this together, and ScoMo, we're with you, mate, but we'd like our sanity too. Sport's a huge part of the Aussie way of life, and we know the NRL and the AFL are working so hard to try and get back onto the paddock, and that should be facilitated in as best a way as we can. We need to foster and encourage sport back onto our TV screens.